Hello, everybody. Paul J. Leslie with Transformative Psychotherapy. And today I am talking to two dear friends of mine from down under, Richard Hill and Matthew Dahlitz. These guys churn out the incredible magazine, podcast, the Science of Psychotherapy.com. Richard is the managing editor and chief educational director, and Matt is the editor-in-chief and CEO. They have one of the best podcasts going for psychotherapists. Their magazine is excellent. They also have at the scienceofpsychotherapy.com some great training courses and other material that I highly recommend. But today, I'm talking to them about the release of their new book, Practitioner's Guide to the Science of Psychotherapy. Now, before we go any further, let me just tell you, this book that's published by Norton, I personally not only endorse, but I think it needs to be in graduate training programs of any type of therapeutic study, because it is an updated look at not just the science part. It really should be called the science and art, because there is some element we're going to talk about where these two meet that is kind of the focus of my work as well. So I get to turn the tables on these gents because they've interviewed me a couple of times. So welcome, Richard and Matt. Thanks so much for being with me today.
Hey, Paul. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, it's great. Actually, the introduction was so great. Let's just stop.
Yeah.
It was cool.
Ending on a high note is usually a good thing, you know.
Yeah.
No, but we really appreciate it. We know that you although it's lovely that the things you said about the book, you say what you think, and that's very pleasing, and we agree. This is such a great framework for study for those who are learning, wanting to advance themselves in psychotherapy as well. And also that beautiful point that we want to talk about is, and just hit this straight away, and Matt, you've got a few words about this, just this word science. And it's difficult. Science is another, I took a word that's been stolen from broader use. And there are a few words, actually words like hope and love and responsibility, they've been sort of reduced, which science has done to itself. But the way we use science, the word science, is in its broader term, as in the knowing of, the becoming aware of, the knowing about, the study of. So rather than being the reductionism about the refining things, about taking away all the variables and all those sorts of things that become science research, this is really about the knowing of, and that's what we wanted to bring across.
Absolutely. And we've had this understanding for a long time now. So I was a bit taken back the other day when someone said, well, you boys are really brave, using the word science with psychotherapy. And I thought, well, really? I didn't realize that science was such a scary word. And as Richard just said, for us, it is the knowing about. And let's face it, there's a lot to know about humanity, the human condition. And so that's what we're on about, is just knowing about all the intricate details. That's not being reductionist. It's just knowing about the details that make up the whole. And so, this capacity to know the detail, but be able to stand back and to appreciate the whole is, what we're aiming for in this book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the thing that jumped out at me initially after the wonderful introduction by Dr. John Arden was the first thing out of the gate is you're going like, let's focus on resources. Because at the first part, you're talking about the essential nature of client resources and how neurobiologically this is important for therapy. So it is not just a brain book. It is not just a rehash of the DSM diagnosis. It is, from what I am reading, it is a flow of the embodied sense that people have as they go through the process, which, by the way, in case people are unsure of the term science, that's also a process. So I like to think of this as the process of psychotherapy. That's what you're talking about. And it just happens to have a large scientific basis for it. So I think this is I don't want to gush over the book because I really do. I really think it's a great book. Tell me, I know with all the work that you both have done, what was the motivating factor to finally kind of say, we really do need to kind of put something out there that updates this process of psychotherapy for the 21st century? What was the motivating push for that?
Gee, we kind of had a surfeit of luxury, of pleasure. We were asked. Certainly the work we've been doing over all these years is evident there, and we've been working towards it. And we've been thinking about writing a book, but in the great sort of connection of the universe, at the time we were thinking of doing this, and at the time COVID said you can't travel anywhere anymore, the lovely Deborah Mahmood at Norton's wrote to us and said, hey, we're interested in what you do. Would you like to write a book for us? And of course, we thought about it for less than a millisecond and said, absolutely. So that was kind of the thing that pushed it over the line. And it made it easy to begin, to begin the work of writing the book. But then, of course, we've been writing it for a decade. So
that's right. I was going to say the writing of the book actually has happened over a decade. It's been what we've been doing all of this time through the Neuropsychotherapist and then the Science of Psychotherapy on our platform. And so it's a snapshot, really, of what we do in a much broader context of the Science of Psychotherapy.
And also going, okay, if you don't know all this stuff, what do you need to be able to give you and it's not so much a foundation, although it is a foundation. What do you need to give yourself a reliable and springy springboard? Something where you can go, oh, I want to know more about that. And oh, yes, I've got that now. I mean, Matt my area is in the genetics, because Ernest Rossi flogged me about learning that. So I've kind of written a lot of that section, and we wrote different sections together. And Matt said he had a great time. He was wondering, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, that's really good. Right. And it really brought it all together. So Matt now feels as though he knows more about the genetic framework. I might have a little bit more expertise, but exactly the same goes for things that Matt's written.
Yes, and so it's a little mini example of what we are, again, trying to do with the Science of Psychotherapy as a community, because we all have expertise in particular areas, and we can all share those expertises so that we all know a little bit about everything. Because let's face it, in this world of psychotherapy, in the world of dealing with humans, everything affects everything else all the time. And so it just makes sense that we at least know about the broadest number of elements that we can.
Mm-hmm.
And know about who else knows about.
Yes,
exactly.
Like,
for example, if someone said, I'm really, been interested, a client comes in and says, I've really been interested in those sort of those shamans and people who do shamanic stuff. Now, I'm sure there are a lot of therapists who go, oh, right, well, and then there's others that would, use a bit of secondary knowledge, and others who might go out and try and read a few books. But I know the first thing I'd say is, hey, I want you to talk to my mate Paul over in the States, because he really knows that stuff. Yeah. Now, I know about what Paul knows, and that makes me a very, very useful resource for my client.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And, I've sat with clients, and I've been able to, discern that there's something going on, physiologically that I know a particular naturopath has some expertise in. And so, the referral is straight away, to her, because I know that's where they'll get the answers and solutions.
Yeah, I really liked how there's a section in the book where you are going over the major diagnosis of the different disorders. And what I really liked in that, even though I have a love-hate relationship with the whole diagnosing thing, but what you guys did in this section, excuse me, is to really look at not why someone has this, although there's an element there, but you go into the understanding the broader picture. So, for example, you look up borderline personality disorder. To me, the way you guys wrote this, it definitely humanizes that rather than, okay, they've had trauma and it's like you going into details about, well, the brain tends to do this, and these are the kind of things that occur. And I think this is important because we get so lost sometimes in categories and things, to think broader, which leads me to this question for you both: is your work, and particularly this comes through in the book, is about systems, thinking of the brain as a system, and thinking of therapy systemically, which I've argued that in some rare cases, that's something that isn't done. Even, unfortunately, even in therapies nowadays that they claim to be systemic, tend to be very linear. And when I'm reading this idea of holistic view of biology, as well as the emotional aspect, the social, what drew both of you to that in the beginning? For those who don't know your stories, what kind of moved you to view the brain, therapy, and life in general through that system view?
Well, Richard is really the one that has brought complexity theory to the table here. So I'll get him to talk about that. Before he does, let me just jump in and say there's three pillars that we talk about at the beginning. That's we've already mentioned that the client comes with resources. Mm-hmm. So the client is the one that is bringing the resources for the therapy. The therapy is a co-created experience. And then it's a complex interaction. And I'll get Richard to talk about what that means, not necessarily complicated, but complex. Richard.
Yeah, it's a great point that these two words, complex and complicated. Complicated where there's unresolvable opposites bashing themselves together. So you need to resolve complications in order to be able to move forward in processing. But even more, and what I bring to the table and have brought largely encouraged by Ernest Rossi, but this was stuff I was doing before, going back to Steven Pinker and Antonio Damasio back in the 90s, is that more than just the brain as a system, or we think in systems in theories, we think in stuff, and life as a system. Yeah, we're starting to get to it. Everything is a system. Right. Everything is an interaction of elements that produces an emergent property that and it is the emergent property that we broadly experience. But we don't tend to have a moment by moment sense of the component elements because we don't need to. But we do need to look at the emergent properties to see how that's the emergent properties is how the component elements speak to us. Now, when you're looking in therapy and looking in mental health and looking in life, what we tend to do is we tend to look at the emergent properties and say, that's it. So in therapy and in medicine, we call that a symptom. And then we all go running around trying to fix the symptom. And we can, like, for example, someone's having a poor sleep. So we'll give them a sedative. There you go. They're sleeping. Look at them. That's all better. Fantastic. Next. And of course, that sleep is merely an indication from the body that something else is going on and saying, hey, pay attention. Now, of course, our most obvious mechanism that the body uses to say pay attention is pain. And that's the one that goes, there's something happening I need you to pay attention to. But why we need to know about stuff as we think in these systems is that we have different ways of thinking. I call it thinking in the system, which I also addressed in my Mirroring Hands book with Ernest Rossi. And your initial conditions are incredibly important. So what is the framework that is occurring? Now, when someone comes into the psychotherapy room with you, into the counseling room or whatever you're doing, and you spend all this energy to provide them with a safe environment, and you try and create rapport, what you're doing is you're creating initial conditions. And if those initial conditions are different than the conditions that are outside, then you're going to have an entirely different experience. And because we don't think in systems enough, we don't realize that safety and that rapport disappears when they walk out the door. And so sometimes people get to their car and they're as bad as they were when they came in, unless you're giving them that ongoing framework. We also have the understanding that there are organizing principles. And this is incredibly important because people think that, oh, it's a complex system. You know, you can't predict what the outcome is. Oh my God, it's hopeless. Let's go back to something we can predict. But the idea that you can do a therapy and get a result is statistically viable, evidence-based. But I'm always interested in the outliers. They're the ones that are the important players that you need to deal with. So, but we have organizing principles, and here's the one that philosophically, therapeutically, relationally, medically, that you can bank on, that human beings have, when given the opportunity and the appropriate circumstances, the system will move itself towards well-being. It will move itself towards a better state. We pretty much can say we know that's true, because if it wasn't, we wouldn't be the species. You know, we would have all died off. And we know that if we're feeling unwell, we lie down, we have chicken soup and various things, that our immune system will move us towards health and well-being. Now, I know there are outliers and contexts of this, because actually sometimes our immune system will move us actually towards death, but that's because there is an argument that that's the best result. That's a better result. But that's an organizing principle. And there are so many. Our therapy is an organizing principle. It's not actually the cure-all. It's something that moves the person in this direction. Then there's things like attractors. We talk about all this in the chapter. And the most important thing is that, given the opportunity and the appropriate circumstances, the system will self-organize itself into well-being. So rather than the therapist being the person that delivers the goods, the therapist is a person really that we're trying to explain, who attunes to the client's natural capacities and the resources they bring and the elements that they are producing at the time, the therapeutic elements that they are producing at the time. The client will almost always be exhibiting the sort of therapy they need. And if you don't know much, then you're possibly delivering a therapy that maybe even making things worse, but not necessarily highly attuned, which is what the relationship is all about.
Yeah, it's that old, if you only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Right.
But we want a whole toolkit. Yeah.
Well, one thing I found interesting is that many things I found interesting, but one particular, toward the last part of the book, in addition, we've already kind of briefly mentioned the idea that the genomes and you know, the biopsychosocial view, is you guys actually put in a part about deliberate practice. And I was really delighted to see that, because I think this is so fundamental to what, in the first part of the book, this is why we do these things, this is how we get better with these. What led you guys to, I know you're both kind of artsy and creative individuals, and to see that deliberate practice is an important part of not only learning therapy, but performing therapy.
Right. 15 years of going to the Erickson Foundation conference and listening to Scott Miller.
You too, huh?
Yeah. But Scott Miller is championing this idea of deliberate practice now, and it's fantastic and it's really important. And but similar to many wonderful ideas I've had, if I look back in history, like one idea I've had, I look back and it was Plato who said it first, and I thought, oh damn, I'm not new. Because deliberate practice, for example, my early career was as an actor. I mean, you can't function without deliberate practice, without taking time to assess what you're doing, without looking outside of yourself and beyond your daily practice. An actor learns as he walks down the street about how to play the character he's doing on stage. So that certainly was an important it's got a historic element, but we wrote that with Scott in mind, and we actually sent it to Scott and said, what do you think? And he wrote back, and he said this is it's a very good representation of what he's doing. So we tried to use these wonderful people who were doing wonderful things. And that,
Yeah.
that was kind of our approach with a number of the chapters, wasn't it, Matt?
That's right. And on that point too, we, you know, because deliberate practice does not sort of negate creativity or intuition. Actually, it supports and nurtures it. And just on the point of intuition, you know, our intuition is informed by, you know, what we know about. So the more that we know about, the more highly attuned, you know, our intuition can be. Our intuition doesn't just come out of nowhere. You know, it's informed. It's you know, we might have known about things for many years and never really seen it in a client or acted upon it. But then there's a particular client in front of you, and just something bubbles to the surface. Oh, wonder what's going on in your thyroid there. And you have this intuition about, you know, something physiological that's going on that could be connected to their mental state. And so you know, it takes some discipline to learn about all the different things, and some deliberate practice is involved in that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You've just had a little while ago the Super Bowl, the Grand American day off, and Tom Brady. You know, it's just like everyone says, quarterback Tom Brady. Who are all the other guys? And Tom Brady, of course, has enormous talent and enormous capacities and enormous resources. But I don't think anybody would think that Tom Brady was as good as he is now because he sat back and just, that he was like that when he started. He's as good as he is now because of experience, because of learning, and I'm sure he could theoretically break down a lot of the processes he does. But he said, but fundamentally, when I get on the field, because I've done the work and learnt the knowledge and gone and learnt it over and over and over again, it then just emerges in spontaneous creativity and intuition. And it is fascinating to sit in front of a client. And people will see this in the introduction of the book. I use an example, a case study, and at the end of the chapter we tell you what it is. And I think a lot of people will be quite surprised because it's actually includes additional knowledge, but it's that intuition of the feel of things beyond the technical. And I'll give you a quick story. When I was doing my brain and mind sciences master's degree, because if I was interested, I thought I should learn something. And that was another example of what I went to there. And so many, I tied together so many bits of information that weren't tied together. So that's another motivation for this book. But we had a girl in there who was brilliant. She really, really was brilliant, early 20s. And she knew the DSM backwards. And we'd sit there, we'd get a case example. She'd tick all the boxes and she'd say, this is what they've got and this is what we should do. And it was brilliant. But I tell you, about half the time, I'd go, oh, I don't know. And she got really tired of this. She said, oh, Richard, what? And I said, well, I don't know. I've just in that sentence, they gave us a little quote in there. And the way he put those words together, that's just gives me a niggle about something. And so I'd put up and blow me down. More often than not, my niggle was right. Now that's knowledge. I was 40 years older than her. So old, 30 years older at that time. But all those things played in. And that was that other thing that Scott tells us to what makes a great therapist is doubting themselves, going, I'm not sure. I need to go further. Whereas this lovely lass hadn't quite learned doubt yet. She was very confident. It was interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're just saying that, and I you know, that idea of pulling in and learning more, expanding your base of knowledge. And recently, I'm working with a client. Been working with her, good long time. Several months for me is a pretty long time, and she's a good client. And everything I have asked her to do, she has done. We are doing some heavy-duty hypnosis. We're doing this. We're doing that, and it's no change until I was just feeling like, you know, I wasn't much of a therapist, but then something was just telling me, you know what, it's okay if this isn't what she needs. And something was just nagging at me about her sleep. She said, yeah, I sleep. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night. Sometimes I don't. So I asked her, can I call your doctor? Just out of you know, just I'm running at the end of the rope trying to figure it out. Anyway, long story short, the doctor told me something that suddenly clicked in my head, and we realized that he and I both, she needs something totally different than both of us were doing. And it turned out it was completely a medical issue. And once that started to be, it's just now started to be addressed, I can already tell a change, and we may just cease our work together. But it's that being open to, sometimes it's not always what we know, just expanding that knowledge base. And like I say, going with the intuition and all. And I mean, yeah, I'm sure I like the hourly paycheck from her, but if she doesn't need to be here because it's something that's purely biological, then, you know, that's good for her. She does want to keep coming for the hypnosis though, but I think she just, I don't know, likes trancing out. I think, you know, we might have to work on that, trying to scale her down, but otherwise, you know, it's all good. So,
well, Matt's written a really important chapter on this, both as a specific chapter about the biological, some of the biological causes of mental things, but as a philosophical overlay. So Matt, if we can talk a little bit about the extraordinary condition known as pandas.
Yeah, so we've had personal experience with this autoimmune encephalitis. So it's a basal ganglia encephalitis. It's an autoimmune disorder where part of the immune system, Th17, these killer T cells get into the brain, they attack dopaminergic system in the basal ganglia. And it manifests then as tics, OCD, different psychoses. And from all outward appearances, if you're just looking at the symptomatology, you would think, okay, this person is just suffering from OCD, or they're going a little psychotic. And certainly, you know, in my experience, many psychiatrists will just see it from the symptom perspective and just treat the symptoms and never really get to the bottom of it, which is an autoimmune disorder.
And you were actually, they were actually prescribing antipsychotics, weren't they, Matt?
That's right. Yeah.
So having no positive effect at all.
Very negative effects, actually making it worse. I mean, antipsychotics and other drugs to basically subdue the person into a stupor is not necessarily dealing with an autoimmune disorder. And then, you know, amazingly, you know, for this particular disorder, it's the immune system is mistaking dopaminergic neurons in the brain for strep. And a simple antibiotic can be the answer, not for everybody. And sometimes it's different antibiotics for different people. But in our experience, we found a particular very simple antibiotic just absolutely, literally overnight dealt with the problem in a huge way. And so here's another example of, you know, we're looking at symptoms, but what do we know about the underlying condition? Are we treating it in an appropriate way? And it just happened that we found, you know, a particular specialist in Sydney who knew about it, could identify it immediately, and yeah.
But it's like you said, Paul, keeping exploring the possibilities.
Yeah.
And Matt himself, I mean, reading that chapter, it's very informative, and you learn a lot and you become. But it's an incredibly touching chapter. Because we're taken into a story of life that is completely disabled and dismembered, not only by what the body is doing to itself, but by the inability of the therapeutic community to attune to that body, to listen, to hear what that body was saying. And I almost read it like a novel. I get there and then, you know, says, and then we just gave an antibiotic, and within 24 hours it was, and I'm going, yay.
But it, you know, as Richard was saying, it's a metaphor as well. You know, it's a metaphor for so many things that we might be missing because we don't know enough about the broader picture.
And we don't know enough about what we don't know enough about.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that this book takes you through, because some things people will go through, oh yeah, I know that. Oh, I'm really interested in that. But I really think it would be hard pressed for someone to read to go through the whole thing and say that they've actually heard in detail in what we talk about everything.
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to those people who say, oh, I just didn't know that. Oh,
yeah. You know, one of the most popular posts that we've had on the Science of Psychotherapy has very little to do with psychotherapy. It has it's something that I wrote years ago about pyrrole disorder, which still in the medical profession, you know, they say, well, you know, it's a phantom thing, doesn't exist. But the pyrrole disorder is where your red blood cells produce too many pyrroles, which is like a waste product, and it strips your body of zinc, vitamin B, and magnesium. And when your body is depleted of those vitamins and minerals, you have a hard time. And there's different symptoms for different people.
And you read another chapter in the book which tells you how lack of vitamin B and zinc and things affect the nature of the way we produce what's called methyl groups, which are vital for and fundamental for gene expression and all kinds of health. And methyl groups are really important in working with allergies and reducing histaminic responses. The dots get linked. It's really interesting.
Yeah. And you know, we're not just talking about biology for biology's sake in terms of these things. I mean, the pyrrole, you know, disorder was, you know, having mental effects on me, and it did on many different people. And so we're trying to chase, you know, what are you anxious about? You know, what's going on, you know, looking into your past. And actually it was just purely a physiological thing that was happening. And once I knew what was happening and I could take supplements, the symptoms just disappeared. No psychotherapy needed for me.
Right. Yeah.
But of course, we also talk about all the psychotherapeutic elements as well. And we certainly have a whole chapter devoted to disorders in anxiety and depression, and trauma, of course, gets quite a lot, because it is a terribly, terribly important thing. The trauma affects our mental state. It affects our subconscious mental or our non-conscious mental state, and it affects our body. So the body holds the score, the brain holds the score, the memory holds the score, the brainstem holds the score. There's a lot of scoring being held in there.
The society holds the score.
Yeah.
And society holds the score as well. And Tom Brady just gets a lot of points.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's the same kind of thing I'm finding. I was reading something the other day, the number of men over 60 getting diagnosed with depression. And for a long time, it's been, well, they're just getting depressed with not enough attention played to testosterone levels. So they have gone just, you know, hey, get that blood test, and because it may be, oh, gee, you're fatigued, you just don't have the avolition to do, and it may just be that. And to me, I think, I don't want to let anyone listening, it's okay if you're a shrink, and it's out of your scope of practice. If you can, you know, again, widen that base, then you're actually more of a benefit to all your clients. So even if you can't help them, just the fact that say, hey, have you had your testosterone check? You might want to talk to your medical doctor, you know, your family doctor.
Check it out.
Because that's
I was talking on a chat group the other day, and brought up this element of schizoidal behavior and things going on. And the chap, one of the chaps there said, oh, well, of course, if one of my client has schizophrenia, of course, I'm going to refer them to a psychiatrist. And I wrote back, and I didn't want to be telling, but I think it was telling. I said, great, how do you know? So how do you know when you don't know anything about it? Because, okay, there's really obvious things like they're having delusions or they're having hallucinations, but there's a lot more to the way schizoidal behavior expresses itself. And a lot of people are high functioning schizophrenics. Some people don't need medication and they can do just fine. So there's all this really, really interesting stuff going on.
And look, if it is schizophrenia and they are under psychiatrists and they're taking antipsychotics, and you're doing some support work with them, do you know that intensive psychotherapy actually is counterproductive? And you know, if you're not keeping up with the research, and you wouldn't know that. You could be going really hard at it, trying to do really intensive psychotherapy with a schizophrenic, and not getting anywhere, or seeming like things are going backwards. And why would that be?
And that can be one of the indicators is, well, maybe they've got schizophrenic. We've got some schizoidal things going on here. So all this stuff is really interesting. to know about. And I mean, that beautiful thing that you went through earlier, I suppose, mid in your career with that client going through many things. See, now, of course, you've done that. So you've learned that. So now when you do a whole bunch of different things, you're trying things and they're not happening, you're immediately going to go, oh, well, no, I need to investigate a few other areas aside from those areas, those pathways I'm going down. And we just learn. And sometimes we learn through experience, sometimes we learn through mentors. And we really hope that this book is a very useful learning tool, again, to help people move to spaces where they're more effective, more capable, and more confident in what they're not confident in.
And can I just add to not to be intimidated by the breadth of knowledge that's out there. You know, both Richard and I, we know a lot about a lot of things, but we're not the experts in any one area. You know, we're not, Richard knows a lot about genetics, but he's not a geneticist. And so we have got the capacity to know a lot about a lot of things, but that doesn't mean that you're not compelled to be the specialist in all of these areas. That would be overwhelming and that would be impossible.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's kind of like the, I remember reading a interview with Robert Kiyosaki, who wrote the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And when the book first came out, he's doing a book signing, you know, it had just blown up. And the one of the people in line comes over to him and just lays into him. She says, I'm an English professor, and this is the worst written book ever. And he says, well, my goal was to have the best selling book, not the best written book. And to me, it's kind of like, you know, the same thing. I don't have to be a geneticist to learn and have that. I don't need to be a psychiatrist to stay updated on the, you know, the bulk of the medications. I don't have to have all of these things. I'm not arguing for being a generalist, but at the same time, you know, it's not a bad place to be when you consider how we're getting so specialized. I mean, our field, we specialize ourselves mentally, I think, by our theories and techniques and all, but, and that's fine to have those, but I kind of, what I'm getting from you guys and have been getting is this, again, the breadth of knowledge opening up. You don't have to be an expert on everything, but the more you know, even just some random thing that you pick up in a training, it somewhere it can be of immense benefit to your client. So, and I want to acknowledge that. Well, guys, this has been an absolute pleasure. I just want to let everyone know the book is, again, published by Norton. You can find it on all the cast of characters, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and your website. The guy's website is the scienceofpsychotherapy.com. Let me ask any from each of you. We'll start with Matt. Final words or comments about the book or just the field in general?
Just be very curious as you continue on. The learning never stops, and it's a very exciting field to be in right now.
Okay, Richard.
And just saying that our book is the first springboard. The Science of Psychotherapy.com, and then our academy, which is the Science of Psychotherapy.net, but you can get there from the .com site, takes us into another great expansiveness. And from there, individuals will springboard off into those things they want to know more about and those things that they don't. But when we're saying about generalist, very often people feel as one of the mechanisms that our body is trying to tell us about what's wrong, whether it's in our brain, in our thoughts, in our heart, in our liver, in our gut. And actually therapists are one of the first ports of call, so that we don't want to be a generalist, but we need to have a broad range, because people are coming to us and we can make them feel better by the work we do and the work we engage them with beyond ourselves.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Guys, thanks so much. I've enjoyed this again, and the book's out there, highly recommended. Thanks for being with me today.
No worries. Thank you so much, Paul.
That was great, Paul. See ya.